Hello, everyone. Thank you for your patience today, and welcome to today's webinar, Simplifying Cybersecurity Policies, a Guide to Compliance Made Easy. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I'll be assisting and moderating our session today. We are in Zoom for today's webinar, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with all of you in an email after the webinar. We do encourage participation throughout the session. So please use the chat or that Q&A option for our short Q&A after the presentation. Educate 360 is so excited to present this webinar today. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Matt.
Hi, I'm Matthew Twells, Business Development Manager here at TCM Security. My job is helping out from the technical side, sort of subject matter expert on cybersecurity and penetration testing for TCM Security, who are part of the Educate 360 family of companies. My job as well involves a lot of teaching as part of the way that we do business at TCM is very much a teach first. Education's in our DNA. And that's part of why we're doing this sort of webinar series, of which this is the third. The first one, if you've seen it, would be the password policy. We did one about the history of passwords, and then the one before, just before this one, was one about access controls. So it's going through the real kind of basics, the fundamentals, of the foundations that are required to really start doing the more advanced stuff that people tend to get a bit more attracted to. But this is the kind of the concrete foundation for to build a strong house. My background, though is a lot of penetration testing. Actually, was a pen tester myself for a little while. Then went into audit. I've done consulting as well, and then moved into kind of more of a business adjacent role over the last couple of years. But in general, this has very much been my wheelhouse for like the last sort of 8, 9 years or so. And that's why I love helping out TCM with what we do now. But this, in general, to finish the series, is going to all be about cybersecurity policies. They are a huge part of complying with virtually any framework. The reason people usually get interested in this in the first place is because a framework of some kind, or a law or a regulation that governs the industry in which they make money, says they have to. We don't like to talk about. We hope that people kind of appreciate it as a craft in and of itself, but for the most part, usually where people are introduced to cybersecurity is that they need been told by a buyer that they need SOC 2 to be a approved vendor, or that they are in finance and it's one of the either the FINRA rules or it's SOX 404, etc., that are requiring some sort of cybersecurity action be taken. And one of the biggest parts that is in all of them is having a policy, just writing down what the intent is for the cybersecurity program as a whole, and sort of writing down who's responsible for it. And this is all something we'll go through here. But I wanted to go first about kind of what happens when these aren't in place or they're not followed. So a couple here, we have a couple of examples. One of they've all, for the most part, been in the news. Maybe number two, if you're not British, might be a little under the radar for you. But everyone, I imagine, is familiar with the Change Healthcare hack from last year. Affected almost 100 million individuals. I think it's the largest known healthcare record breach in history. And during the kind of after action digging through of like what happened, a big part of it was is that there wasn't a enforced use of multi-factor authentication, and that was part of what actually enabled the breach to get to the scale that it did. Another one is Transport for London, which is the company that owns and manages all of the trains for the London subway system, which is called the Tube. But big part of that is also the buses, etc. But mostly the Tube that they manage were hit by ransomware a little while back, compromised the personal data of over 5,000 customers. This is including stuff that's really stuff you don't want to be out there without your knowledge, things like home addresses, banking details, etc. A big part of that was that when this happened, there really wasn't any clear incident response policy or incident response procedures that they could follow. And this will become a running theme as we go forward, that keeping them simple. If no one reads them, you may as well not have them. So this will be a theme that you'll see a couple of times over the next 45 minutes or so. And the last one we're looking at here is AT&T. There was a breach in March 2024 that affected 73 million current and former customers. And this things like social security numbers, which were then breached themselves as well fairly recently. But this is, again, not information you'd want volunteered to the wider world. And a big part of what the kind of the after action and sort of the notifications that went out, it was a lot of it was around third party security and practices around using vendors and third parties in sort of the software and technical supply chain. So the thing that kind of unites all of these things is that the lack of a policy did not cause these hacks, but what could have happened was that these are all things that a cybersecurity policy, if written well, should cover. And if written properly, the expectations, the consequences, and the steps to do so should fit well together. And ideally, when something happens, people know, okay, something has happened. This is what constitutes an incident. I need to go open this policy and call these people. These, when tried, tested, and updated, and when they reflect reality, allow for a much faster response. You'd be surprised. There's a reason, when people groan when there's like a fire monitor and people do these drills. The idea is that when it's really happening, a lot of people say, they rise to the occasion. What will happen most of the time is that you will fall to the level of your training. When people panic, everything goes out the window. And a big part of the thing when it comes to being hacked is that it's traumatic, it's disorienting, and not having this stuff written down, not having this stuff practiced is a huge factor in how well you're able to defend it or even detect it. Because these are the kind of rules that people go, okay, I know what the expectations are of me. So the big problem, as it is in most security, is not necessarily stopping the nation state level people coming in with laser pens sending Morse code to an Alexa that allows people to drop all the encryption keys. It's just a really simple maxim that it's not technology at all. There are really complex requirements to arrange defenses in a line into policies and procedures and instructions that real people, real human beings doing real work in your company can actually follow. If they aren't being followed, they may as well not be there. I can't say it clearly enough. If your policy is beautiful and it's well formatted and it is in a drawer covered in dust because no one knows where it is, it's useless. It is a paperweight to do its job. Policies really do need to be plugged into the real world. They need to be obvious. They need to be omnipresent, and people need to actually read them. Maybe not want to read them, but they need to be able to find them and read them. Because if they can't follow them and they don't know what's expected of them, situations like the ones we've looked at can happen, or at least be exacerbated by the lack of a clear instruction set. So the problem here is that most cybersecurity frameworks, especially really the likely reason that you're watching this webinar, is that you're mandated to have a policy of some description, and it's usually a cybersecurity framework or a law or framework that is asking you to do this. And it's a deceptively challenging requirement. You've got to understand your assets, your responsibilities, and your processes quite well before documenting them. And a lot of you are thinking, yeah, well, I do. I work at my company. You'd be surprised when you drill into it how narrow that understanding is, or your understanding of a process doesn't match what the people doing the actual work are doing right now. Maybe it's drifted, which is also a big problem with policies, is that they're written once and never updated. Creating a proper policy document around that as well adds another challenge. There's a bit of an art form to it that we'll go through. It's something that you'll see a kind of baking metaphor go through all of this, and it really is like I've always thought that cooking is art, baking is chemistry, and a lot of thing with writing a policy is that there is something kind of alchemical to it that if you have to kind of follow the recipe for it. So policies are just one part of a cybersecurity program, which despite sort of the hacker background in me wanting to go down to the bottom and start looking at, kind of code and binaries, etc., really real security work at an enterprise scale starts from the top. Governance, there needs to be an understanding from the top of what they want to happen. There needs to be centralized sort of and the management intent. It needs to be clear what the company as a whole and its leadership wants, because everyone else's job is to execute on that. But documenting those requirements in some sort of formal, centralized, readable format is what we call a policy. So it fits right underneath governance as referenceable items or entities that are a referenceable method of knowing what management wants. They're not necessarily giving you the specific ways of getting these done. That's the job of a standard. They're certainly not step-by-step instructions. They'd be a billion pages each otherwise. Those are the job for procedures. And they're not recommending best practices either. Those are the job for guidelines. So they fit in what I would call a kind of documentation structure somewhere near the top. So, if you're not familiar, especially if you're not from a GRC background, you might not even know what I'm talking about when I say a policy specifically. You might have a vague idea. It's a bit of paper, it's got a lot of writing on it. But in general, I'll do the basics and go. The cybersecurity policy is a formal document, just like any other that you might have. You have ones documenting how much people get paid. You have formal offer documentation when people get offered jobs. You have formal termination document when they get taken away. There might be all manner of formal documents that you have, and the policy is no different. It's just that whereas usually there's an intended recipient for these other documents, for this, the intended recipient is everyone in the organization, and they should be written accordingly. They focus specifically on how your organization protects its information assets, documents, files, intellectual property, etc., and manages the risks associated with them. So it's essentially a formal document with a defined scope and written for mass consumption. To write one yourself, there's a few things you need to work out. And I want to try and keep it in mind here that policies aren't as complicated as they look. We just make them complicated. But really, you just need to work out what it is it in your organization that needs protecting. Because otherwise, what is the point of doing this? Who's responsible for doing that? You'll have a team and someone, because if no one's responsible for it, no one's going to do it. It's the same as assigning responsibility for any task. This is no different. What can or can't be done to make sure that the protecting is being done. So they might be saying that you can't do something. You can't go to this website. You can't download your own files because it's going to protect the network as a whole. So you don't need it as part of your job, so you can't do it. This is the basis of something called an acceptable use policy, which is can either usually does have its own policy in a lot of organizations, but you could nail it down in a cybersecurity policy as well. And there has to be consequences for not complying. If there's no consequences, no one cares. Then if no one cares, no one follows the policy. So what a lot of auditors will look for as well is that there's evidence that you are following what you've written down in the policy, because again, they're useless otherwise. But the big point why you really want to invest some time in doing this properly is that these policy documents, written well, written clearly, kept short, and at least written in clear English. I'm never going to lie and say that it's going to be fun to read or fun to write them. They're not. But in general, if they can be used as a framework to make decisions without asking people, then you've done a really, really good job. Because what that is doing is lots of small questions. Where's this? Who's this guy? If they're all answered by the policies and you know what to do, then situations like Transport for London, you just know to go reach for the incident response policy. And right in the top there, there'll be incident response procedures. I know to go call this person who's in this job right now. So let's start moving. This entire decision framework got made without anybody being asked because people knew where to go in the policy. So these are why you would invest some time in doing stuff like this. Like I said, the baking metaphor is coming around now. You'll start seeing pictures. But in general, you need some ingredients before you make bread, and you're going to need some ingredients before you start writing the policy. Skipping this phase is where a lot of people fail and where you end up with these bloated policies that don't have a real scope to them and that no one reads. Is because this is the pre-work that makes writing a policy surprisingly easy if you have this stuff. Big one. I think I've mentioned this in all three of the webinars, but an asset inventory. If you do absolutely nothing else from the 3 or so hours I'll have spent talking about this stuff in these webinars, it is go find some software system or task someone in your organization to just go and find out what you have using any tool, hook, or crook that you have and put it down in one place. And then have some simple procedure for updating it when you buy a computer or update, spin up a VM or something. Just have some vague idea of what you have, because this is be what you're protecting. It's what the policy is for. So those assets, from in terms of information, are going to be things like people's details. Where are those kind of financial details, contract details set? Do you have sensitive? If you're working on things like movies and it's all pre-released, then that would be intellectual property. That would be something like an asset inventory. Where is it? What do you have? That's your asset inventory. If you do nothing else, write one of those. It will help you in every single other job you have to do in risk management and cybersecurity. Critical asset identification. Now you've got your assets. not all of them are going to need protecting equally. The laptop that I'm currently speaking to you on, whilst valuable in and of itself, can be replaced. The network, the files that I'm using are stored elsewhere. They're stored centrally. That's a tactical decision because it means that if this laptop breaks, I can use another one. I log on and it's connected to the network, it's connected to the domain, and I can go download my files again and I can continue working. It doesn't necessarily need to be this laptop because it's not stored locally. So a file that potentially I have that is kind of a list of to-do list tasks for me for the week does not need the same protection as my employment contract. It certainly doesn't need as much protection as my social security number and my financial information with the company that I work for. These are different levels of criticality, and this is probably the second most important thing that you can do. If you have an idea of what's most important, it will let you scope down work. If you're going to try and hire a penetration test, or get someone to go through and assess whether something is possible, you might be able to save yourself some money by going, hey, I have a really good understanding of what we have, and we don't need to test them all because now I know in my asset inventory that a lot of it's replicated. So there's lots of repeated infrastructure. Okay, so maybe I can take a sample and save myself some money. When it comes to tight budgets, static and falling budgets, this can be something that saves you tens of thousands of dollars. So knowing what needs protecting most and what you have on its own can save you 20, 30 grand by not testing everything, because that is a mistake we see quite a lot. Data classification. What really needs to happen here is not necessarily every edge case be legislated for, but there just needs to be a breakdown on how do I prioritize protection? Why is something critical? Why is something non-sensitive? The military is actually really, really good at this and drills it into you from the day one. Is that there are different levels of classification of information. You need clearance to go up the chain. There's read up and read down rules, and it's very similar. Usually, people from a lower clearance with supervision can read up, but they can't write down. What it means is that there's sort of this hierarchical structure where the more clearance you have, the further you can reach, you can read up, but you can't communicate that information back down because it's above their clearance level. This is a really simple data classification, and it's worked for dozens of years now, for decades, and it's something that is borrowed by quite a few enterprise, especially people who work under very, very sensitive or critical infrastructure where something being released would have either detrimental or kind of national security classifications, is that they'll be forced to put in something like this. Like this information requires protecting, it needs marking, and the communication and dissemination of that information needs to be controlled. So this is something that data classification in practice, and as long as you have some sort of process or breakdown for how to determine whether something's critical or not, why does it need protecting the most? What does that mean? That's data classification. And if you have this, writing a policy becomes very easy because you're going to go sensitive here, classified here, non-classified here, and then just go down whatever it is that you need to have done with those different data for classifications. Otherwise, what you're doing is legislating for the entire population of documentation and assets that you have, and that tends to be difficult to capture the edge cases that need capturing to have a clear policy. Big one as well is responsibility matrix. There's a breakdown of who is responsible. Again, if no one's responsible, no one will do it. Everyone's busy, everyone's tired. So why would I do this if I've not been assigned the responsibility officially? And a responsibility matrix is just a way of going like, hey, it's not Steve is responsible. It is the information security officer is accountable for doing this. The CISO is accountable for doing this. So whoever is in that role is thus responsible for the stuff in this policy. And it allows for, we mentioned in access control webinar that we were talking about mapping, role mapping, and the entitlements that are attached to any given role need to match what they do for a job. And this would be something where you'd map their role to the policy to be you are responsible as CISO for ensuring this policy is enforced. But you're not responsible as a security analyst for making sure the policy is enforced. You're responsible for following it. That's something you would write down, sorry, in a responsibility matrix. This is work that is a little laborious to start off with, but do it once and keep it updated, and it will help you do almost everything else in your organization. And then regulatory requirements. If you're writing this to satisfy regulatory or legal requirements, you want to make sure that those are well known so your policy hits them, if that's the reason you're doing this. So we're going a little further in our baking metaphor here. We're going to look at the anatomy of a basic cybersecurity policy. Again, they really aren't as complicated as they look. They really aren't. There's about, I'd say, seven or so major pieces here, and I'll go through some of them here. But the purpose and the scope is probably the most important one. Cover too much, your policy is going to be 40 pages long and no one will read it. You really don't want this to be a paperweight. If no one's following it and no one cares and no one's reading it, it may as well not be written. So knock down what is the purpose of this policy? What is it for? Like, what are you trying to achieve with this policy? And if you can't answer this, you haven't done some of the preparatory work that we've looked at before. It should be very clear from your management, it should be very clear from your requirements what this policy is for. And if you can't answer that question, you should probably go back and do that first. But when you do have that, this should be a paragraph or two just describing why am I writing this policy. And again, I'm going to say this over and over again, plain English, no jargon needs to be readable by the entire organization, not just the IT folks, because everyone needs to be able to basically grab a copy of this within about a minute or so, know exactly where they are, know exactly where they're stored, and be able to read them and then almost disseminate the instructions without someone technical to be there. If there's anything else specifically that they can't, then it would be either take it out of the policy or see if you can break it down into non-technical language. Roles and responsibilities. This is why we looked at the team before. This is why we looked at the responsibility matrix. If you've got that squared away, then writing this section is really easy because it's basically CISO responsible for enforcement, security team employees responsible for following, everyone responsible for following the policy. This is something that gets very easy if you've done that responsibility work. It's a little harder if you haven't. Risk assessment. So this will be a section you can or can eliminate based on what framework you're trying to write the policy for. But really, it's just dictating a general set of management intent about like how would someone new to the organization assess whether something new or something that they haven't seen before is important enough to protect. So it'd be like information that has direct business consequence if leaked would be something critical. Okay, that's something I could see. Like, is this a memo for Taco Tuesday? No, then it's probably not critical. Is this a contract for the deal we have with Lockheed Martin coming up that if it gets leaked, then someone else would be able to know what our pricing is? I'd say that's critical because it's sensitive, it's time sensitive, and it has massive commercial implications if that is leaked. So we're going to put more protections around that. We're going to make sure the communication of that. But you wouldn't know that if you were new. And that's really where you want to write these for. Imagine someone's come here, has no context whatsoever on your organization, and write for them. So this risk assessment should just clarify in a couple of statements just the rough framework that you're using to determine critical. And that's why we did the criticality analysis before. Asset classification. This is why we did the inventory. What types of stuff do you have? When you say laptop, what does that mean? Because you could argue something like a Surface has a keyboard and it's got Windows on it. Is it a laptop? You need to dictate that because if it's a tablet and they come under a completely different set of security standards, then you can't blame someone for not putting in the endpoint system that only goes on with laptops because that's what your license says. It's stuff like that, these edge cases, that if you've done a good asset inventory and you have a really good understanding of what your organization have, then you can write really clear policies that cover a lot of ground very quickly. If you don't, then this is where you have issues like that, where like, oh, maybe that's the weakness that someone goes through is a lot of handheld devices. This is a big thing in construction where there's like sort of tablets and sort of ruggedized devices that go out on sites. Maybe they are difficult to secure and manage remotely because they mostly are out in the middle of nowhere on construction sites, getting broken all the time. How are we managing that? What kind of security do those devices have? Because they're still connected to your network, so they could very much still be stolen, taken. Could someone connect back in? Because an attacker, to them, access is access is access is access. They're in, they win. So classifying your assets is really important. So what makes A A? What makes B B? What makes a laptop a laptop? What makes a phone a phone? What kind of devices are or are not included? And just have a really good understanding of what those are and just break them down in a series of bullet points. Because that will allow people to use that framework that you just described in the previous section. Access control. I'm not going to go too deeply into this. The last webinar was entirely about access controls, so I'm very much going to just go here. Who gets access to what and why? Like some things we'll actually do some access control. It's actually the example of writing a policy section. So again, not going to go too deeply, but really, this is what this section of the policy handles is the responsibility matrix should help you a lot with this. It's one of the reasons we suggested you do one beforehand. But really, the question that this should answer is who gets access to what information and why, and who should they ask if they have any questions? Because with that responsibility matrix, filling this out should be very easy. And if you don't, it gets much, much harder if you don't have a good understanding of who should have access to each information, different kinds of information. What kinds of information are there? This is why we did that information criticality analysis beforehand. So now we know that critical information should only be accessed by people whose job it is. If you haven't done access mapping, you don't know who those people are. So I know all these kind of boring inventory tasks. Hopefully, it's starting to sink in now why they're so important. Like, why is it that we're doing work like this at scale? Is because the kind of policy work that really does protect you, this kind of eat your vegetables work, is what will keep your organization safe at scale. I'll finish off here as well. Incident response. Really, this should be another policy, specifically with all of your procedures about what to do in an incident response. But fundamentally, there should be at least one section that says, this is what an incident means. This is what it's classified as in these are signals you can use to go, this is an incident. That's like an incident declaration threshold. And at that point, you just go read the incident response policy and like hyperlink it if you want to. And really, this section is the who you're going to call. What do I do if there is an incident? And the answer would really be follow the documented incident response plan found here, call this team, whoever's involved, and there should be someone on call. That is all you need for someone in a panic to go, okay, understood. Click the link, follow the plan. And then it's the job of someone writing the incident response and business continuity plan to make sure that documentation is up to date, really cleanly written. Because again, imagine everyone is new, not familiar, not technical, and reading this in a panic, and it should be written and understood accordingly. And then consequences. What happens if you don't comply? A lot of the times, the consequences can be fairly severe. Can be usually anywhere up to disciplinary action, termination sometimes, especially if in really secure classified environments. If you leaked a top secret document, you probably would get fired for it. You'd certainly get a stern warning. So again, this is the reason why it has to be a carrot and a stick for this. Otherwise, no one will follow them. Because if it's just like, hey, nice piece of documentation, glad you wrote it, but I don't really care. I'm not going to change what I do. You will if there are consequences to your continued employment or to the quality of that employment, or it may end up you losing the sort of the juicy role that you wanted. These consequences help govern people's actions. They'll make different calculations based on what the consequences are for those actions. So it's something that needs to be put in part of a policy. It's something you need to think about kind of what is fair, what would be too onerous. You don't want these to be too difficult to follow, but you do want people to follow them. This is the most difficult part, is the balance of it all. So we now know what a policy is. We've got a rough idea of the anatomy of the policy, but they're built out of these things called policy statements. These are the actual construction, the base unit of a policy, and it's someone going, this should be done, you should do this. All those, the actual text of a policy, they really are at their core just a collection of policy statements categorized by subject. And writing an effective policy statement looks really complicated, feels like legalese. It really isn't. And frankly, if you're doing this properly, it should be almost near conversational. You just need it to be, you really want to index around clarity. I told you at the start that I'm going to say it over and over again because I want the message to get through. What needs to be done? Who's responsible for doing it? When should it happen? Answer those three, and you have yourself a good policy statement. It really is that simple. If you are if this sentence is 14 words long, it's probably too long. If it's got words that you couldn't describe on the back of a napkin, it's too complicated. Really index on clarity, clarity, clarity. Like anything that you write in a policy statement should damn near fit on the back of a business card. So how do you write them? There is a technique, there's a bit of an art to them. So here, the basic formula for a policy statement kind of goes like something like this. You can see on the screen that I've color coded it, so I'm going to use that color code in a minute. But really, it's going to be the role is involved. So who is this responding to? Like who should be reading this policy statement? Shall action, like what should they do? What is it that they're being asked to do? Entity, what is the thing that their action is intended to be towards? Is it a computer, files, a department? To protect the asset or function. So that's going to be what is it that they're being protected? Is there a function of the business that's being involved here? And then there's usually a time frame and a method. Like they should notify, that's the action. By method could be email, phone, something like that. Time frame could be immediately, within 30 days, annually, quarterly, etc. So here's an example. It's really, really simple, but you can see right here how I've used a few of these. All employees, role must report action, suspected security incidents. That's what's being reported to the security team, the function of the business, immediately. Time frame. That's really clear, and there's not an ounce of technical jargon in there. If you understand, most people who've never seen cybersecurity before, if I said security incident, what is that? Would come up with something being like, oh, something bad's happening, people are responding to it. Close enough that it's clear enough to use this policy. If you can go even further than this and get it even clearer than that, I applaud you. You should. That's the goal and the index you should be using. If there's something that could be explained in clearer language, you should do it. So it's not as hard as it sounds to write clear policy statements. It's that what people think is clear is usually a couple of levels more obfuscated than it should be. Like I said, you really, really don't need to get fancy. As you can see here, I used a picture of some fancy scored bread. It's kind of the metaphor here. We're actually baking out the policy right now, but describe the things that you are already doing right. So this is the way you start. You're going to be sat there and you're going to be sat in front of like a blank page and go, I have no idea what to write. You're going to be doing a bunch of stuff right already. Describe that. Like how are you doing things right now that have not resulted in your company being broken into over and over again? So there's going to be things that you are already doing okay. So who do you talk to right now to do these jobs? To the thing, how are you governing information right now? It might not be perfect, but it's something, and it's something you can iterate on. Once you're out of blank page syndrome, this will start to fly very quickly. But just in clear and plain English, obviously write it conversationally first if you have to, and just describe what you're doing in the clearest plain English you can. And then with the regulatory requirements, which is why we documented them beforehand, you need to write up requirements for stuff that you aren't doing but need to. And you want to do that the exact same way. It needs to be clear and plain. You are required to do this because SOC 2 asks us to, because you don't necessarily need to quote the policy, but in general, they need to blend in with the rest of what you're doing already, because again, otherwise people can't follow them. I always say aim to write for a fifth grade reading level. Obviously, the people reading this will have a much higher reading level, but you've got to remember these are referred to often in stressful situations or by people who are stressed. If something is mandatory, use the word shall or must. So now I know I can point to any of my policy declarations, any of my policy statements, and go, it says must behind it, it's mandatory. And I can just tell people that. So then these people can then make a decision on the policy, being like, well, I shall do this. I must do this. Okay, it's mandatory. I'm going to go do that. If people can use your policy that way, because it's written in clear English and I know who to go talk to and I know what I have to do, then they're doing their job. That means that's another question you didn't have to answer. It's another 20 minutes in a pressure situation where that's really important that didn't get wasted. So this one's a little complicated. I'm going to probably hover on this one just a little bit, but this is an actual section of a policy. So I've written one policy statement, and it's kind of easy. It was an easy example about what we were going to do with one tiny piece of a policy, but this is what a section of a policy looks like. Again, pretty simple. I used access control. It's something that I've done quite a bit. I've actually written access control policies before. It's quite complicated, so I thought I'd use this one as an example, especially because it fits into the previous subject of the webinar as well. So if you ever watch these in order, it'll make sense. But access control here, you just break down what it is that you're covering into different sections. We broke those sections down about 10 minutes ago into what your policies should be in the skeleton. Underneath there, they're going to be a bunch of policy statements. You're going to govern those by topic. So you're not just going to have one thing about access control, you're going to have dozens potentially, different types of access, etc. So that's why I've done here like five. access controls. It's going to be the fifth section of the policy. And underneath, I'm going to govern a bunch of different stuff. But I know that everything to do with access control is going to be in section five, which means that if I'm in a panic, I can just look at section five. I can refer to just section five. This is why we structure these policies this way. But as you can see here, I've done 5.1, 5.2, 5.3. If there are like sub points of unique user access, you would do 5.1 unique user access, point 0.1, point 0.2, point 0.3, point 0.4 to make sub, so you can then reference really specific policy statements. This is where you get into kind of contractual language. You really ideally want to write the first statement clearly enough that it encompasses things and doesn't need a sub point, but they will. That will happen. So that's usually a pretty common naming convention for doing this stuff. It should make it nice and easy to read. But if I tell you, go look at the cybersecurity policy under section 5.1.2, I know I need to go here. I'm going to go to unique user access, and it's going to be the second sub point underneath that. I don't need to quote to you. I can just tell you to reference that. I can make a reference to it. You can go find exactly what I'm talking about. Write your policies this way, and it makes it so much easier when it comes to audit time. They're easy to read, they're easy to reference, and if they're easy to read and easy to reference, people will follow them and people will use them. Because again, if they're not doing that, what is the point? So here I've written a few policy statements. These are real ones that I've used before. So for unique user access, I've gone the IT department, the role, shall create unique user accounts, action, for all employees and contractors. That's who the unique user accounts are for, prior to system access being granted. That's the time frame. It's pretty easy to understand. IT department needs to create a unique account for everyone who is an employee or a contractor before they get access. So they can't just be given someone else's. Understood. That covers unique user access. It didn't need a sub point. It may do in your particular organization, but right now it doesn't. But it's clear. And if you really want to make sure that people understand, you could even put a glossary of terms as well. That's something I've written in policies before. It's the glossary of terminology. So I will just define what a user account is too. So people who really aren't technical can at least go reference what that means. So that's another section you could have at the bottom of your policy if you wanted to. I think user accounts are kind of colloquial enough at this point that people understand, but you get the general idea. Access reviews. Department managers' role must review user access rights, action to critical systems. That's what's being accessed. The rights are for critical systems quarterly. That's time. That's the time frame. And then document this review. So that's another action they need to take. You can see here, like the order of the components can sometimes move, but they're mostly always there and they use 90 to 100% of those sections if you're writing a good policy statement. So on here as well, privileged access. This is a big one for a lot of companies. Accounts with elevated administrative access. So that's what's being affected by this policy statement, and that's being used first here. But you'll see why in a minute. Shall only be used by documented approved personnel. That's the role that has the access, the role being subjected to by the policy statement for performing administrative tasks, not routine activities, and should be logged out of. That's the action they should take once finished. That's the time frame the action should be taken within. I can read that and know that is a clear instruction and that's something I can clearly follow. And you can also point to someone following or not following it. That's a binary. Either I have done that or I haven't. But clear sections made up of clear statements based in reality make for easy to read policies that people actually follow. And again, you've heard me say it a billion times. You probably hear me say it a few times more before the end of this. So this sounds like a lot of work, right? It is. I've written policy suites of policies for people before in previous roles, and it's serious work. That's why people template these a lot. You should, frankly, if you can. If you have a policy template and you're just writing them for different subjects, use them. If you use the same naming convention, that same 5.1.1.2, that's a really good way of doing it. You don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel every time. But can we not just skip this? Like we were okay before. Why don't we have them? You could, but I would not recommend it. No cybersecurity expert worth their salt would recommend skipping having a policy entirely. The likely reason that you are writing one in the first place, and probably at this webinar, is to achieve compliance with some sort of framework. Many of the major cybersecurity frameworks explicitly state within them that you need one to pass. Big one, SOC 2. If you are going for enterprise customers, that they'll ask you for SOC 2, and a big part of one of the requirement criteria is having a policy documentation suite, especially a cybersecurity policy, hence the subject of this webinar. But they're not just best practice. They certainly are best practice to have one. You should be able to show people what you're intending to do and then prove that you're doing it. That is the basis of almost every audit. Is this is what we say we're doing. Here's the proof that we're doing it over the time scale of the audit. It really is that simple. So they aren't just best practice, though you should be doing this anyway, but they are mandatory if you are complying with one of these frameworks. But in general, they're also just a really good idea. They're just a way of organizing documentation. There's a reason the military uses a huge system of documentation and bureaucracies because it works. People know what to do, they know what to follow, and you can just refer to a document instead of having to give unique instructions every time, which is exhausting. So here are some common pitfalls. There's a lot of ways to do this. There's a lot of ways to sort of skin the proverbial cat here, but there's a few that I would highly recommend avoiding if you can. Big one is the novel. If it's too long, if it's full of jargon, just because you know the word doesn't mean you have to show everyone that you know the word. They don't get read and they don't get followed. If it doesn't get followed, it may as well not be there. If you can't fit a policy statement on the back of a napkin or a beer coaster, frankly, you should be able to write a policy section in small writing on the back of a beer coaster. It's too long. Like, and really go through again. And if you think it's close, get someone else to go look at it and be like, I want you to take 5 words out of that. They'll find them. This is a real skill and one that technical people really struggle with. And I'm saying I'm laboring this point so much because I was one of those people. Something I learned the hard way when I did my couple of years in audit is they'll be like, you need to make a point and then stop. Like they don't necessarily need all the context that you think it does need, especially not in policies. It just needs to be this, follow the ingredients, stop, move on. Write another sub point if you need to, but that point as well should be as short as possible. Overall, what you end up then is a very clear, easy to read policy. The copy paster is another one. So this is where there's more than a bunch of compliant policies that you can just be like, I don't want to write this from scratch. It's a skill in and of itself. So I understand that most people will be like, well, let's get off to a running start. So you copy and paste one off the internet, or you get a one off ChatGPT. This is actually a fantastic use case for ChatGPT in the use of AI. Is that just a structure for these policies should really be yeah, the structure of these policies can be broken up very quickly by something like a Claude or a ChatGPT, but just make sure that the statements actually apply to your organization. Otherwise, come audit time, someone's gonna be like, "Well, what are you doing with all of your construction paperwork?" And they go, "Well, we're an accounting firm. We don't have any." And, well, your policy says that you have them, and you're like, "Okay, I don't have any controls around those." Like, well, you failed your audit because you have your policies, then you might get a kind of persnickety auditor that really does go like you have not following your policy because it's full of stuff that you never implemented because you never actually edited the policy. So be very careful copying and pasting verbatim from policy templates or from AI. They're really good tools. Don't outsource the work to them. You'll still need to go around and do them, and that's pretty much frankly, a good piece of advice for using AI in general. The Islander is a big one. Security teams are notorious for being like, well, I kind of know what these people are doing, so I'm just going to dictate. I roughly know what they're doing, but you don't know what does their actual workflow look day to day? How does information flow right now? What were you asking them to do? And is it yet another thing that they're going to get really exhausted with? That's just, is it theater or is it needed? And this is a huge part of why a lot of follow like developers think have a kind of a fractious relationship with security is because there was never any stakeholder input. No one asked the developers, what could we do to make the work what you do more secure whilst not making work a nightmare for you? So asking people to provide every code diff or every single thing that they do for review and making sure that that review gets signed off before you move on looks great. It's a hellscape in reality because people shipping code at like enterprise velocity just will skip it. They just will completely ignore you. And then when it comes to audit time, you'll get a big finding because of it, because the policy should have just been reflective of the reality of the way that your development team works. And don't just assume that you can dictate it. What people will normally do in real terms is just ignore what you've written, especially if there's no consequences in the policy. So this is where you need buy-in. resistance. If you can get buy-in while you write a policy, that's how you get people to follow them. And one of the big reasons that when I started writing this stuff myself, the very first thing that I did was book a meeting with every team that the policy would have affected and just ask them, how do you do your work? How do you do your work right now? Then I put it through the regulatory framework that it needs to look at. And if you were doing something right, I just wrote down what they were doing right now. So they were already compliant. They should not be onerous to follow. A lot of what's in a policy should be patently obvious. And if they are patently obvious, then good, because you're doing things right. If it's massively different from what you're doing, then yeah, you probably have some work to do from a culture standpoint. And then the last one, the ghost. No communication when it was written, no communication that it got published. There's no consequences for non-compliance. No one knows the policy exists, so no one follows it. This is huge in much larger organizations like banking, where its audit is this entirely separate section where people they turn up and they think they're the cops. So they're going to go, hey, well, have you read the policy? And they're like, where is it? I have no idea. I had that happen all the time when I was an auditor, where they just had no idea that the policy existed. It was the first question I started asking after a while, and it was usually the first finding was a documentation finding because they're like, yeah, well, we have a policy. I'm like, well, do you know where it is? Yes. Okay, where? Can you show me? And they'll go, can I get you 5 minutes? And you're like, you don't know where it is. Like, that's fine. That's not a problem, but I have to document that. So that's a big problem with writing policies is clarity, clarity, clarity. Don't copy and paste without looking at it. Talk to the people the policy will affect and tell people that it exists and where to find it. And I'm going to finish on this one. This is the policy creation lifecycle. It really isn't as complicated as it looks. And if you take nothing else away from this slide, my diagram work probably leaves a bit of something to decide here. But really, assess and prepare, inventories, assets, classification. This is all that prep work that makes writing a policy a breeze if you have it. Eat your vegetables, get your fiber, do the work. I promise you it will help. You are not saving time by skipping this because also this work in the assess and prepare section will help you with every other governance and requirement framework that you have. Plan and scope. What is the scope of the policy? What are you looking to achieve with it? Who's responsible for it? If no one's responsible for it, nothing will get done. Policy development. Got to write the thing at some point. Clear language, policy statements, sections, clear, consistent naming convention, real world basis. Talk to the teams that you're writing about. Review and approve. Management has to sign off because otherwise that's where the consequences come from. There needs to be, if you don't follow this, this will happen. If there's none of that, no one will follow the policy. Maintain and improve. Review it on a yearly basis. That's also part of a bunch of compliance frameworks. But in general, this is just good practice. You may have a lot of policies don't even mention AI or agents or the use of generative AI if they've even got a generative AI policy. So this would be the reason that technology moves so fast and the way that organizations are kind of re-architecting their operations around it would probably require a huge review of documentation that it's involved because this is again maybe an asset that you have, which might be an internal model, an internal AI system, is completely ungoverned by your current policy framework, which means that if anybody's using it in a way that isn't the way you're liking it, it's not their fault. It needs to be documented. You need to tell them what it is they can and can't do. Otherwise, you can't sit there and then try to enact consequences on them if there was no policy. And then it goes around again. So with that improvements, those updates, it goes back into assessing and preparing. You update all of that work, and then you plan and scope a new update, and then you write those new policy statements. Then they get signed off, and then they maintain and improve, and you see it go round and round and round. But yeah, this is the currently the end of what I had to talk about today. But in general, if you have any questions about TCM security, the work that we do, this is a big part of what we do. It's not just penetration testing. We do a lot of risk and consulting work. A lot of it can be as well helping you with your policies, not so much writing them for you, but certainly helping work on them for you. Feel free to either use the form being supplied or contact me on the email address that you can see if you want to talk. And then the Educate 360 as well, they do a huge catalog of fantastic training and so training programs. They can do things from a programmatic basis all the way down to individual seats. It's all about sort of attracting and retaining top talent. But that's the end of the presentation of the webinar for today. So thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. This was so much good info for our audience. And if any of our audience members wanted to learn a little bit more about our free penetration consultation or a little bit more about our past webinar sessions, please do not be afraid to visit us at educate360.com or go ahead and click on the links I dropped in the chat. Alrighty, I believe that should be it. We had a couple questions on copies or recordings, and you will absolutely be getting an email with the recording link for your viewing pleasure after. Alrighty, thanks so much, Matt, and thanks so much, everyone, for attending today. We'll talk to you very soon, and thanks again. Bye for now.